Many of you will remember Kevin Peggles and Ravi and others that this has been our focus at BSMA for the last 13, 14 years. This meaning optimization of the clinical supply chain. And we have been very fortunate to have had Bill Coakley spearheading this effort. And I recall Ravi Kiran was assisting him in all these years, along with Dr. Prashant Yadav at Harvard. Today we have a rather unique opportunity to discuss two things. Number one, there's an industry consortium of SAP, Roche, Tenpin, and many, many other biotech and pharmaceutical companies who have embarked on building a system, which is an industry platform for clinical and commercial supply chain. And I really believe that our members of BSMA can provide tremendous input and participate in the development of that system, which obviously will take a year or two or three. Part two of our conversation today should be, there are many, many other areas where we in the ecosystem, all the way from the drugs developer to the patient, can find ways of overcoming some of the impediments and burning issues we have. So those are the two subjects we had in mind, and I would like to turn it over to the expert, Bill Coakley, to guide us through this discussion this morning. So Bill, if you'd be kind enough to take the ball.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Devendra. And good morning or good afternoon to all of you, depending on where you're calling in from. So I know you can't see the screens yet, but I'll do my best to explain what you can't yet see. So starting with the agenda today is first we're going to go around asking everybody to introduce themselves. I'm going to explain the mission of the BSMA Steering Committee. We've got at least 2 or 3 folks from 10th Pin who are on the call, who are going to provide an update of the CTSM consortium. Going to then get to what I consider the meat of today's purpose.
Hey, Bill.
Yes.
Bill, that's breaking news. You are now the co-host for this conference.
Aha.
So please.
Okay.
So you can share your slides. Thank you.
Okay. Can people see this?
Not yet.
Not yet, Bill.
While Bill is figuring that out, I just want to share a thought I had in the back of my mind. You know, with the COVID-19 vaccines that have been developed with the help of Operation Warp Speed, they've done an incredible job. There he is. Perfect.
Okay.
We can see it now, Bill.
Great. Okay, we're there. Okay, so everybody now should be able to see the agenda. So as I was mentioning a second ago, I'm hoping that we can spend a good chunk of today's call talking about the challenges. I'll kick it off by mentioning some of the ones that many of you had shared with me, but really this meeting is all about you. And the goal is to hear what some of the pain points are that within your own organizations, or what you believe the industry is facing, so that we could select some of those challenges as topics for webinars, conferences, or perhaps even a newsletter. Then at the end of the meeting, discuss future meeting dates and times, not just for these events, but perhaps for the first webinar, and then open it up to any other business. So before I talk about steering committee charter, I'd like to take a couple minutes, if we could, to go around, ask each of you to introduce yourself, and B, tell a little about your background. I should have mentioned in the beginning that each of you was hand selected for this group because of a unique experience, skill, or background that you possess. And I'm hoping that you know what those are and can share that with the rest of us on the call. So I guess since you're showing at the top, Devendra, if we could start with you.
Well, as you're aware, I have the privilege of being the co-founder and the executive director of the Biosupply Management Alliance. I just been a lifelong student of supply chain management, and I really believe that drug development is a critical area that we need to focus on, and I apply our technologies and best processes and people's skills to make it more efficient.
Okay, I don't know if people are seeing it the same order as I am, but Kevin, I'm seeing you below me.
Sure. My name's Kevin Puggles. I'm the Vice President of Global Supply Chain with Illumina. Been here for about 5 years. We're a leading developer, manufacturer, marketer of sequencing equipment and consumables, heavily involved in COVID-seq right now, or COVID around surveillance of the virus. Prior to Illumina, I was with a big German company named Bayer Healthcare for about 7-8 years, leading their biotech, pharma, and med device supply chains. Also spent about 10 years with Clorox, consumer packaged goods supply chain, a number of years with Deloitte Consulting. So I've been doing supply chain for about 30 years, been active on Devendra's BSMA for about 10. Really excited about this steering committee and this team. And one area I'd love to focus on as we get into it is I think we can do a better job really understanding clinical customer requirements. What exactly are our customers looking for us from a supply chain perspective, starting with the customer and working upstream? Would love to go that route. Thanks, Bill.
Ravi, I think I see you next. You're muted.
Are you muted, Ravi?
And now
Yes,
he's off.
okay. I am here. Hi there, Ravi Kiran. I'm head of Biopharma External Innovation at EMD Serono, which is the subsidiary of Merck KGaA, Darmstadt, Germany. I'm here in Menlo Park. My background, I have more than 30 years experience being at Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, doing drug discovery, drug development, clinical development, and business development. Also been an entrepreneur, started 4 companies of my own, consulted for global pharma, and been involved in supply chain issues for about 10 years now, looking at pharmaceutical supply chain. Have had numerous discussions with Devendra and the team about how pharma could do enhance supply chain issues, never knowing that we would reach a point of inflection with the whole vaccine supply chain. Novavax was a company, the CEO was a friend of mine a few years ago, and I wasn't really sure that Novavax would do anything worthwhile. But now we see that Novavax is at the center of attention for everything that we need right now. So I think it's telling the story of how supply chain can really, especially for the last mile, for big pharma, for biotech, for the patient. I think it's communication is something that we need to really enhance for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Linda, I see you next. You're muted.
I didn't hear you, Bill, so I heard you a little bit. Well, good morning and good afternoon. My name is Linda Bowers, and Bill and I knew each other before his company, Genzyme, acquired our cell therapy company. So we had cold chain well before it was called cold chain, and we did cell therapy for major burn victims, as well as, if you know, the product now on the market called Carticel, articular cartilage. And I went over and I decided I wanted to see how larger pharmas worked after being in the biotech community in Cambridge, Mass. And I went to SAP and worked globally with their life sciences industry business unit. And since then I've been at entrepreneurial companies that have worked on clinical trials and how to make them more efficient and the communication more efficient. I've worked in identity security and most recently with packaging, artwork, and labeling software. I've worked with Michael and our paths have crossed a few times, Michael Schmidt, and I now work at Tenpin as a strategic advisor. It's a pleasure to be on this call.
Thank you, Linda. Laura, and you're on mute.
Hi, Bill. Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you, Bill, for reaching out to me and inviting me to join the BSMA steering committee and participate in this cross-sector, cross-pharma dialogue. I know Bill from BioMarin. I reported into Bill a number of years ago. So my background, I've been approximately 15 years now in pharma. I've worked in various functions. I'm a pharmacist by profession. I started off in the United States and immigrated to Europe. I'm living in the Netherlands. I've worked mostly with labeling and supply chain clinical. I'm now working in regulatory affairs at Astellas and director of rest of world labeling. My interest really and pain points that I can see throughout my career in the pharmaceutical industry are really the lack of systems integration, the difficulty of updating labels and labeling, within the mandated time requirement. So we're a highly regulated industry. We have to be able to meet these demands. We want to do the best for our patients in providing up-to-date information, safety information, and also stay within compliance. So I'm really interested in hearing about potential technologies that are out there to streamline, this whole supply chain process, and in specific as it relates to labels and labeling. So thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Mary Jo.
Hi everyone. I'm Mary Jo Lamberti from Tufts University. I'm on the faculty there, and we've done a number of studies at Tufts CSDD, which is the Center for the Study of Drug Development, on the supply chain. We've looked at comparators. I've presented at BSMA. So really looking at the industry as a whole, gathering metrics from different companies on the supply chain, and we hope to do some updating of our benchmarks in the future. I know that's been an interest at Tufts. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary Jo. David.
Hi, everybody. I'm David Volk. I lead our U.S. operations for clinical supply at Roche Genentech. I'll keep it short since you're about to hear from me a lot more shortly, but just wanted to say hello. And also, it's a fun group here. Some of you are old friends. Some of you I've known a very long time but haven't seen in many years, and some I know by name. So looking forward to connecting more. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Derek.
Yes. Hey, this is Derek Thornton. I'm currently a clinical systems manager at Amgen. Been there, so really focused on IRT builds for clinical studies that we run. I've been here at Amgen for a little over a year. I've been working with John Pross while he was here. And before that, spent the last 12 years with Almac Clinical Services, where I headed up a department of supply chain managers and project leaders. And we certainly had a lot of involvement building some configurable IRT systems for clinical studies. Certainly happy to be here. I'm grateful for the invite, Bill, and looking forward to some good discussions about some of the challenges we face in the industry. So thank you.
Thank you. Luke?
Hey, everybody. Luke Moyer here. Currently the head of global clinical supply chain at Insight. Been working in clinical supplies. My first job was in 1997. It's been a little while. Was with Merck, Centocor, Janssen. Centocor is part of Janssen, and J&J. I also spent some time at Almac. And I've been at Insight now for about 2 years. It's great to see all of your beautiful faces. Some friends from the West Coast I haven't talked to in a while. You know, I think when Bill and I were talking about this, I'm going to represent, I hope, you know, the smaller side of the pharmaceutical industry in this discussion and in these processes. Insight is, you know, we have a pretty good foothold now, but we're still growing and we're expanding. We're fully virtual. We have a whole bunch of different systems that need to work with one another. And so I think the timing is good. We're also on the verge of implementing SAP. So, you know, I was eager to get involved. I have been involved in the implementation of 3 separate forecasting and simulation tools. And so I hope that I could bring some of that experience to bear, and just happy to be here. So thanks for having me.
Okay, thank you. Amy, I see you next.
Good morning, everyone. Actually, I'm not sure why I was selected to be on this team, but I have worked in clinical and commercial supply chain for many years, both, you know, heading up the clinical supply chain for some very large trials, but also commercial supply chain, working with the 3PLs. And it's funny what Laura said about labeling with Astellas. I had a project working with Astellas and labeling, and managing all those different countries is just really a stunning process. So I hope that you are doing well in that role there. The challenges that I see are not only just managing the labeling, which is a huge endeavor, but also making sure your inventory and that everything tracks across all the different platforms at the, you know, at the 3PLs and at your company and at clinical, at the clinical supply depots, et cetera.
So thank you, Amy. And I will explain on the next slide why you are such an important part of the membership. Okay, Mark.
Yes, hi. Good morning, everybody. And thank you, Bill, for the invitation. Again, so Bill and I go back quite a ways at BioMarin. Coming up on, Bill, yeah, it's our would have been 8-year anniversary. So I've worked for Bill over the last 8 years until he left in the spring. So I currently manage the clinical supply chain group, specifically supply planning for all the pipeline products from phase 1 all the way through commercial approval. So a lot of the challenges that we've been dealing with, we've come a long ways in progress from planning on spreadsheets. We're completely on Oracle. We've done integration with our distributors through a file transfer system to reconcile our inventory with that of our distributors. Some of the challenges we have with netting the inventory directly out of Oracle, we have kind of a workaround system. So we're investigating other opportunities for IRT integration, which I think, and also maybe CTMS on from the clinical operations side to improve our demand planning and forecast. So it's been a long road, and there's even a longer road ahead, but we made quite a bit of progress over the last 8 years. So I look forward to working with all of you, and got a good team here. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Mark. Matt Donnelly.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for the invite. Nice to see everybody. There's a few people I've used to work with in the past or have come across in these various conferences over the years. So I currently lead global supply chain at BeiGene. That includes both clinical and commercial supply chain. So it's kind of an interesting perspective to see them both together. You know, there's obviously a lot of similarities, but there's also a lot of differences. It's hard to explain to people at times. And then prior to that, I was at Genentech and Roche for about 13 years in various roles, but primarily in clinical supply chain for many years, and was very involved with the implementation of the Clara system there. So I know that well, and know some of the folks from Lodestone that are now at Tenspin and all that good stuff, and worked very closely with David Volk for many years there. And then I was in commercial supply chain my last couple of years there. And then prior to that, I was doing consulting and kind of working in different industries, but always kind of in supply chain or operational excellence type roles. So like a lot of people, I think one of the challenges I still see is it seems like in this industry, we're in the dark ages when it comes to integrating systems, and for some reason can't figure out how to integrate systems, which just still perplexes me when I look at what Amazon and Walmart and various other companies can do. I don't know why we can't do it, but you know, we still struggle to integrate IRT with ERP, with CTMS, with EDC, et cetera, which we have to figure a way out to solve that. So that's one of the things I'm looking forward to, is figuring out how to solve that. And then also, you know, I think just there are some commonalities, like I said, between clinical and commercial. And so I think there might be some value there from this forum as well. So thanks, and looking forward to further discussions.
Thank you, Matt. Mike Schmidt.
Thank you, Bill. Hey, everyone. Greetings from Basel, Switzerland. I'm Michael Schmidt. I'm a founder of Tenspin. Before that, I was an owner of a company called Lodestone, and I'm working with a number of life sciences companies on the design and the implementation of the treatment-specific, data-driven, patient-centric value chain. And you will hear more from me in a couple of minutes.
Okay, thank you. Dan Silva.
Hey, Bill, and hello to everybody. Nice to see some familiar faces. I come to this group with a consulting background. Really, for the last 6 years, I've pretty much exclusively been focused in clinical supplies. And as a part of that, I delivered some projects, but also have formed some groups and forums. And you know, it's amazing to get that perspective across different companies of what these challenges are, as well as what some of the successes are. And you know, I wouldn't say that really over the last 6 years anyone's found you know, the golden nugget on how to handle this. It almost seems like you have to take a bigger picture approach, which is what I'm understanding this group is doing. But some of the patterns I see in terms of looking at what, you know, how companies have discussed their challenges, and some of the ones we're going to be talking about on this call, really comes down to maybe 3 different categories. There's certainly interoperability. We've heard that from a number of people already on this call. And that's between systems, but also between companies, because so much is done externally. There's also capability, which is getting into some of the newer technologies, newer trends in terms of how things can be done, and what existing packages provide or don't provide. And then the third thing that probably makes the first 2 just a little more challenging is the increased need for agility. So I kind of look at things from sort of that perspective. And I think as we go through what some of these challenges are, it'll give us a flavor for maybe not necessarily pursuing individual point solutions, but really taking a broader picture of everything. So that's it for me. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Dan. Morning, Malu.
Hey, good morning, Bill. Sorry, I'm late. So it's good to see a lot of you guys. It's been a while. A little bit about myself now. I'm with BeiGene, actually under Matt Donnelly's team, leading one of the global programs here at Beijing. Been here for about 2.5 years. And previous to that, I was at BioMarin under Bill's team and worked with a lot of you guys here, Laura, Luke, Mark, good to see you guys, leading the clinical program at BioMarin. So majority of my background has been with clinical supply chain. And I see a lot of the challenges that a lot of you guys have mentioned, just the challenges of trying to integrate all the different systems that we work in supply chain and how we just can't seem to get it done. So very excited to be part of this team to try to resolve a lot of those challenges and see what we come up with. Thanks for the invite, Bill.
Okay, thanks. And last but not least, Mr. IRT himself, John.
Thanks, Bill. Well, happy to be part of BSMA, and Bill, thanks for inviting me to be part of this. Met Bill 2 years ago, I think at Scope. We were on a panel together and got a lot of good insight from you. But I'm here. I'm the IRT guy. I've been in IRT for about 20 years on the provider side, starting at ICTI, which is now Almac. Went to ClinPhone, was at PPD for a little bit, went back to Almac, and then was last at Amgen, where I ran the IRT team there. Oversight of, let's say, just about 40 folks who oversaw study builds, maintenance, and UAT. So I'm actually currently unemployed between jobs right now. I started a new job on Monday, but I hope to give a lot of insight into a lot of just the clinical system side. At Amgen, we are part of a clinical systems group, so have a lot of experience with EDC, CTMS, integration with ERP on supply chain side, and amongst other systems. So really excited to be part of this.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna try quickly to go through the steering committee charter and make up some time. So the slide that you see in front of you is really input from all of you, which can and will evolve as it has over the past 14 years that I've been associated with BSMA. First charter goal is to educate BSMA members on current and future state of clinical and commercial supply chain to promote industry standardization. Now, this can be processes or systems related. To identify, discuss, and align to industry best practices that members and solution providers can incorporate into their design, including SAP, Oracle, or whatever systems you have or plan to have. And to use this information to share at BSMA events, perhaps for SAP to incorporate into their design or whatever the case may be. And this includes input, not just of the big pharmas, much of which are involved with the SAP and 10th Pen Consortium, but the small, medium, and virtual companies. And I think you just heard many of them talk about, introduce themselves during this call, that you're representing the BSMA footprint, which represents all the size companies. As in fact, most of them, I dare to say, are the small and medium size, and most of them probably don't yet have an ERP solution in place yet. Next is to improve connectivity with internal and external customers and suppliers. And I think Mike and Dave will address the significance of this when they talk about their cloud solution. And to address handoffs between clinical and commercial, which many of you have talked about. The next two will sort of go hand in hand, understand the cost drivers and enablers to measure and manage these in meaningful segments, and help members educate their executives around the need and value of ERP solutions and what technologies are available. I think too many companies in our industry, especially the small and medium-sized ones who don't yet have revenue from commercial products, wait too long before implementing their systems. And that has significant implications, which we'll talk about later. And last, certainly not least, is to enable people to connect with their peers. So I'll hand it over to Mike and Dave.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, so I think Michael and I will take the next 5 slides. We'll kind of bounce back and forth between each other as we try to kind of cover some of the key messages. But just to start, I think some of you probably heard about this consortium that we've pulled together that is founded by SAP, Roche, and 10th Pin, but is also pulled in quite a few companies. I think Michael will have the exact number, but I think we're at something like 15 companies, something like that at this point, that are involved in this consortium. But let me start with a little bit of background first. So I've been in clinical supply for about 7 or 8 years now. And as mentioned, worked with a number of you over the past. And it's really been an interesting trend over the years. And I think we can see this trend continuing. Our industry is very much maturing and growing and expanding at kind of a fascinating pace. We see this within Roche, but then also I see this when I talk to colleagues at industry conferences or look at the supplier landscape out there. So we definitely see increased volumes. I think our industry, if I kind of rely on some market research, is growing at about 10% a year for quite a few years. And we're becoming significantly more mature. Many of our supply chains started out small in clinical supply chain, but now I'd say they're quite large and quite significant and justify, I'd say, an increased level of maturity in terms of how we approach it. So within Roche, we've seen this. We've also, within Roche, been looking at how we take our next leap in terms of maturity with our IT systems, and how do we drive better integration, including how we better optimize and manage our supply chain by looking at things like waste and overage and integration with the supplier landscape. We have a major initiative globally to upgrade our SAP system across the company. And as part of this, our question was, how do we make sure that clinical supply chain is really well integrated in that initiative and is a part of the overall landscape. And so what we came to was this idea of, okay, can we not only just solve this problem for ourselves, but can we also maybe help the industry move in this direction as a whole, and maybe answer some of those questions and challenges that Matt mentioned earlier, right, around system connectivity as part of it. And so this is where we got together with SAP and with 10th Pin with the idea to build a solution, an SAP solution for clinical supply that can be used as a standard product across the industry, but also in doing so, pulling together a consortium so that we all align on best practices and standards, whether we're using SAP or not, so that we can share data in a standardized way. We can have the exchanges in a standardized way. And so I think to talk a bit more about what this consortium is, maybe I'll turn it to Michael for the next slide.
Yeah, thank you, David. And thank you, Bill, for the introduction. So as you heard already, this is a joint consortium that is driven by Roche, SAP, and 10th Pin. Some of you might have had already exposure to SAP, well, in the current job or maybe in your previous life. But some of the companies that are listed here that were initial part of the consortium that we have started are running their clinical trial supply operations in SAP or based on SAP technology since many years. And that is exactly why we came to that starting point. And 10th Pin, I mentioned earlier, we were, well, actually some of us were part of a company called Lodestone before. And Lodestone was the company that together with Roche, Amgen, Lilly, Novartis, and Merck in the US has developed in the last 8 to 10 years CTSM solutions based on SAP technology. So as David mentioned, we have built this consortium now, and we really believe that the participants are not only contributing to a true end-to-end view into the clinical trial supply chain, but also are significantly benefiting from the discussions that we are having there. And also, as David mentioned, the industry is obviously going through significant changes. We see that the lines between clinical and commercial are blurring. The lines between medical technology and traditional pharma biotech are blurring. There is so much happening that impacts the way how we are planning and executing clinical trials. And all these topics we want to discuss in our consortium. And we are now at 15 participants. So other than the ones that are listed here, we have J&J, AstraZeneca, Boehringer Ingelheim, Gilead, just to name a few who are already on board. And yeah, back to you, David.
Yeah, so, okay, so what are we trying to achieve with this goal? I mean, we can definitely talk about technology solutions we want to achieve, but I think it's more important to talk about the high-level principles that we're trying to achieve for the industry. And that's where we have these 4 listed here. So first and foremost, I would say, is we're seeking to set industry standards. For those of you who are technical, I want to be very careful. There should probably be a lowercase s on that. Because sometimes we can get hung up on the standards terminology. But the idea is, can we all align and agree on process and data standards so that when we exchange, maybe within our companies or with our service providers or in our supply networks, we're able to do this in a seamless and integrated manner. Really, I mean, for those of you who might have come from other industries, and Matt's referred to this, right? I think we're a few generations behind, honestly, in terms of supply chain. So high tech really has made this transition. Automotive has made this transition. And so how do we follow in those footsteps and really follow some of those practices that those industries have done? By having those industry standards, we hope to be able to enable this concept of a supply network. More and more companies are moving in the direction of being more virtual, being more integrated, relying more on service providers. In some ways, Roche is kind of a legacy dinosaur in this space, an anomaly where we have the vast majority of our work is done internally. But even then, we have this huge network of suppliers that we partner with, and most other companies are even more networked than we are. Ultimately, so if you could just go back one quickly, Bill. Ultimately, I think we all care about in clinical supply chain flexibility. We all know this is kind of a linchpin of how we need to operate. And to enable flexibility, the goal is to have end-to-end visibility across the entire supply chain. And ideally, you know, end-to-end is one we can always define where we set the ends, but the idea is push that boundary as far out as we possibly can in terms of end-to-end visibility. So a bit more now. Next, I'll go back to Michael.
Yeah, so this is basically the program at a glance. So this is what we used as a kickoff slide on the 3rd of December when we had our first round of kickoff with the first wave of participants. Yeah, just a quick, you know, everybody is under an NDA there, and I believe it makes a lot of sense to mention that. I had 3 calls today with 3 companies that are interested to join, and some of the first questions were about confidentiality and NDA. So yes, we are all operating under an NDA. We are also not going into really competitive spaces where you speak about like specific treatments or prices. No, this is all about how do we want to plan and execute clinical trial supply. We have different levels of engagement. So we call it silver, gold, and platinum, and that refers to the level of contribution that we expect from all the individual companies. We are using agile methodology, and what is more important is actually we are organized in 4 work streams. So you see the 4 work streams here. We call the first one Study Master. This is really about collecting all the intelligence that you need in order to plan and execute a clinical trial supply chain, all the master data that we need, all the integrations with external systems such as CTM and IoT systems. We have a second work stream looking at forecasting, demand planning, and actually supply planning, where we also look how do we integrate with site stock replenishment as an example. And then work streams number 3 and 4 are about production. So there we cover everything around clinical manufacturing, clinical packaging, blinding, serialization requirements, integration also here with external systems where needed. And then we have to deliver work stream finally, where we get the product to the patient and where we are looking at how are we collaborating with external logistics or warehouse service providers. And as we said several times, this is really about building a standard solution. And the technology we are using is SAP. Some of you are not using SAP today, and that might not change in the future, right? You might at one point go for an ERP solution that might not be an SAP solution. That could be. Or some of you might consider implementing an ERP solution in the future that might be SAP, or you might already be running SAP today. So we have different levels of maturity here. But the clear message is the entrance criteria for our discussions here and to get your intelligence and contribution is not that you have SAP or that you buy SAP, right? Because we first want to have an industry/business perspective on what we are doing. Otherwise, it's difficult to get to true industry standards. And what technologies you are using at the end of the day, well, that's obviously a separate discussion, but the main objective of what we are doing here is to build a solution based on SAP technology. And that's obviously going to be used in many, specifically of the larger pharma companies in the future who are all running SAP as an ERP backbone, typically already in the commercial world. And maybe a final comment you see, and we mentioned it shortly, we also brought in IoT vendors and clinical supply chain partners like clinical packaging, manufacturing, and distribution. And that is specifically to serve the purpose of having a truly integrated end-to-end view on what we are doing with clinical trial supplies. David.
Okay, so finally, just to close this off, I'm going to say, the most common question I get with this consortium and building the solution is, how do we justify this? Why does this make sense from a business case perspective? I think we have the elements on the slide, but let me just put this a little bit more anecdotally. And I'll use Roche as an example. I know we're a large example. I know we're an extreme example. But in clinical supply chain within Roche, and I think it's okay to share, we're sitting on $1 billion worth of inventory just in clinical supply chain. So I think we have an obligation to manage this in a professional manner and to increase our maturity for how we manage the supply chain, both for that cost element, but also because of the significant implications, right, in terms of reliable and flexible patient supply. So it's all about achieving that next level of maturity and being able to go after the really true business benefits of an improved supply chain. Roche is a big company. We're a very, very large company. But I think all of us would find that scaled accordingly, we're facing similar issues and we have similar responsibilities. And so that's why I think we have this benefit. And then maybe to close, I would say, the interesting question is, so what's the link to BSMA? So we have this industry consortium with all these companies involved and really championed and led by SAP, Roche, and 10th Pen. I think there is, and it's a true working team. I think we have something like 80 FTEs currently on this initiative across all these companies. But a lot of these are very large companies that are engaged. And so we probably have a potential blind spot with a connectivity to the small and mid-size companies. And so that's where I think the potential collaboration with BSMA is how do we expand our reach of input and ideas so that the solutions that we're developing are not just a solution for large pharma, but are also solutions that can be scalable across our entire industry, much of which is made of small to mid-sized pharma companies and service providers. So that's the input we're hoping for with this community.
So thank you, Mike and Dave. So to pick up where they left off, the other differences between the SAP 10th Pen Roche Consortium and the BSMA is much of what the BSMA steering committee is looking to achieve goes beyond systems issues. And we heard time and time again, industry standardization. And you also heard that many, if not most of the members aren't on SAP. For that matter, they're not on any type of ERP system. But it's important to note that before you even implement a system, you need to have good processes. And it's important that we as an industry understand what best practices or what those processes can or perhaps should be. So if I had to break these bullets that you see in front of you into 3 areas, the first is really about, how much should I make? When should I make it? Where should my inventory sit? And there's several challenges that are preventing people from being able to make those decisions, regardless of whether they're trying to figure that out on an Excel spreadsheet, on an advanced ERP system. The second set of challenges here is going down to the lack of understanding by executives, inability to justify proper ERP solutions. Many companies find themselves in a situation where they don't seem to have a challenge getting approval for, let's say, an IXRS system. But when it comes to getting approval for an ERP solution, they don't know, they're unable to get the approval at the right time, if at all. In many cases, it's not until they have the revenue from their first or second, or in some cases, their 4th or 5th commercial product approved before they start working on selecting and implementing an ERP solution. So much of what this steering committee will be about is if you have a system, how can I improve my existing systems capabilities, such as maybe focusing on how do I get shared data on the cloud, to those that are saying, I'm not ready to select or design a system, which is okay. So what processes can I improve? And how do I know the right time to select a system? And how do I convince my executives? And last, the last bullet there, that great emphasis needs to be put on being able to achieve a seamless handoff between clinical and commercial. While in the past, it wasn't uncommon for companies to take 7 or 8 years to get a clinical program approved, and then it's more or less thrown over the fence to a commercial team. Those days are a thing of the past for many companies, especially if you're involved in gene therapy or orphan drug or whatever, where you might even be on patient number 3 on your first clinical study, and you're already being challenged with, okay, we're going to submit our filing next year. Time to plan your PQ lots, time to figure out how you're going to use them, make sure you have enough for commercial, make sure you have enough dating left in them to support launch, help us figure out what countries and what dating you're going to have for those launch countries. And to be able to do that, many of you are aware, are huge challenges. So with what little time we have left on this call, I'd like to sort of go back out there to the rest of you and say, if we needed to pick, or if we wanted to pick, I should say, topics for webinars what would you want them to be?
Well, Bill, I was thinking maybe one on different best practices for clinical forecasting, demand planning. That would be something I'd be interested in on that end.
Okay, Luke, I remember you saying that one as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that is pretty ubiquitous, right? I mean, I think that forecasting is something we need to focus in on.
Okay.
I know that we've all heard about COVID and ad nauseum, but I think it might be good to put a stake in the ground in terms of what BSMA thinks of the COVID supply chain and share some thoughts, ideas. It always draws attention, but I don't know if we've made any open discussions or dialogues about it. So it might be an interesting area.
Okay.
Hey, Bill, along those lines, you know, COVID made us figure out direct to patient really fast. And that was something that people talked about at conferences for like 5 years. And somehow we figured it out and got it done in a couple of months. So it's just kind of the power of, you know, it's the whole, you know, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So it would be interesting to see how do we do that going forward though, right? We did it in this kind of unique situation and had to figure it out and made it work and probably, you know, brute force and various other ways. But now the question is there value in continuing that for what type of studies or for what type of situations, what type of products, and how do you sort of make it to where it's something you can just do on a regular basis now?
Okay.
Phil, I might suggest that in my opinion, one of the things that leads to the most waste and the least amount of flexibility is that as clinical supplies has traditionally been more of a push system. And I think the flexibility, being able to be nimble and to move more to a pull from a manufacturing perspective is pretty key to in optimizing supply and reducing costs overall. So I would say a push versus pull webinar might be useful. Suggestion.
Yeah, the one thing I was thinking about here is a webinar around how to influence the C-suite, you know, the CEOs of a lot of the companies we work for or work with, around the importance of an end-to-end clinical supply chain and the value that it brings to the company, not only for shorter cycle times on trials or a better customer experience, savings for the company, as David talked about, working capital savings. I'm sure folks out there in the BSMA community would love for some tips on how to convince C-suite that investment here is really required and prioritization is required. I think that would be a good discussion of sharing best practices amongst folks on the webinar.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay, in the interest of time, if anyone else has some ideas, and I hope you do, please reach out to me by call me or email me. And then as a next step, what I'm going to do is either A, wait for people to email me and volunteer to be on the webinar, and I won't hold my breath. So plan B will be to reach out to you and ask if you're able and willing to do so. I'd like to propose that we try to shoot for sometime first half of March for this event. I'll pause for a second. Everybody okay with that?
So are you saying, Bill, we would have a webinar early March, or we get back together to get more into the details of which webinar and which topic and who's doing what?
Well, give me a week to figure that out.
Okay.
If all the answer, if the webinar doesn't require a lot of preparation, then the idea would be to A, get the subject, B, get the speakers, give them, 2 or 3 weeks to prepare. And that leads us to sometime around March. If it turns out we need another call like this, then that may slip a few weeks, obviously. Sound okay?
Sure.
Okay. And then frequent and timing of next meetings. There's a difference of 10 hours between those of us from California time versus those that are in Germany and Netherlands and so forth. So are we okay with 8 a.m. calls? And is there a specific day of the week that might work better than others?
Friday morning.
I'm sorry?
Friday morning.
That can be tough. Well, we don't have any folks who are waiting in line at the pub right now because of COVID. But I do know that our counterparts in Europe never liked us scheduling meetings at pub time on Fridays. Anyone else?
Not Monday.
Not Monday.
Monday is
Okay.
usually horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, those are pretty good.
Yeah.
Thursday, are a good day. Actually, this time worked really well.
Yeah.
As long as we have them set up, in advance, I can work with this time for sure.
Okay. And you saw from the introductions that we have a pretty well-rounded group, and hopefully now you have a better idea why, given the scope and charter of this group. If any of you feel that there's people that you would recommend to be added to this because of the value they can bring the association, or because we may have some gaps, which I think we do, in some skill sets or subject matter experts that this group could benefit from, please email me and let me know. Okay, any other business?
Thank you.
Okay, again, thank you everybody for your time and your wisdom.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Great
Bye.
day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Goodbye.
Bye. All right,